Escape vector plotted. Coordinate formed. Launch.
Welcome, dear listener, to another episode of the Escape Vector podcast. Today we're talking about the Mothership tabletop role-playing game, created by Sean McCoy and published by Tuesday Night Games. In this episode, we'll give you an overview of what you need to know about it from the perspective of someone who's run it for a year and throughout all the draft release updates for its first edition. Alright, so Mothership. Mothership is a relatively new, rules-light, science fiction, horror, tabletop role-playing game. In terms of flavor, it's kind of setting agnostic. You can have some flavors of Dead Space or Event Horizon, Aliens, or the Alien film franchise, Predator, spooky versions of Inception or The Matrix, if you're into simulation or virtual reality type horror. Anyway, the point is, you can play almost any genre or subgenre of horror with the Mothership system. And even if you're not that into horror, you can play something that's more like science fiction action. What I love most about this game is that it's easy to learn, teach, and play. Other things I really like about this game are how hectic things get when shit hits the fan, and how characters are so quick to generate, even on paper. I'll talk about this a bit in a few moments. This is a game where your character's abilities and resistances are represented by 4 stats and 3 saves. You don't have to roll for everything in this game, but when your characters are under pressure or there are some stakes involved, then to succeed, you have to roll 1d100 under that stat or save value. Your character's skills will make it easier for you to roll under that threshold. So I guess that's another thing I really like about this game. By having that value to roll under known on your character sheet, you sort of know where your characters stand and how likely it is for your character to succeed. Another thing I like about this game is that it leans towards more of a narrative or theater of the mind sort of game experience, but you could still play it on a grid or a battle map with some approximated distances and range bands. That's why this and a related game called Cloud Empress are my new favorites for playing in person and online. So let's talk about characters. The characters in this game tend to be really squishy, actually, and vulnerable. If you go in with the mindset, and I also recommend you introduce this idea to your players. If you go in with the mindset that these are characters in a action or action horror film where not everyone is going to make it out alive and some of them are going to die horrible deaths, I think you'll have more fun as opposed to creating a precious character that you will be upset with losing. Characters are skilled in some areas, but they will be tested under pressure, as the odds are often stacked against them. So the pen and paper way of creating a character takes about 5 minutes, and all of the steps are actually integrated into the sheet's design. I find that really, really genius. So all the steps are outlined. You start with your character's personal details, like the name. Then you move on to rolling for each stat and each save. Then selecting your class and adjusting your stats and saves accordingly. By the way, there are 4 player character classes in Mothership. There's the Marine, Android, Scientist, and Teamster. In this game, everyone except for the Android are human, but that's not to say that you come up with something for your own table. So for the Marine, you can think of someone that is a military type military combatant, or a security specialist, bounty hunter could fit here. The android is a sort of robotic character. They get a bonus to their intelligence and ability to resist becoming afraid. And in the overall fiction of this game, or the overall mood of this game, they tend to unnerve humans around them. So think perhaps the bishop androids from Alien 1 and Alien 2. The androids, in my mind, when I think of them, I picture a sort of mannequin looking android. I'm not really thinking something that is close enough to pass as human yet. Although, in the spirit of the game, you really could make up whatever you'd like. Your android could range from, like I said, Bishop to the T-800 in Terminator, Arnold's Terminator, or even David from Prometheus, or to something that's completely mechanical, like a C-3PO character. That's up to you. The scientist class also gets a bonus to their intelligence. I mean, they can range, in my mind, from, yes, a scientist, but also to a doctor, a scholar, those sorts of things. A teamster is a crew member that can have a bunch of different roles. When I think of a teamster, I think of a pilot, a courier, someone who loads things onto the ship, a mechanic, space janitor, or asteroid miner. And the great thing about these classes is that they can get further specialized, or even you can blur the lines a little bit of what kind of jobs these player characters have with the skills that you can choose for them afterwards. So for example, if you pick a Marine, but you're thinking maybe a combat medic, then perhaps you'd be a Marine with the field medicine skill. Similarly, if you wanted to be an assassin android, then your android could have the military training or maybe even firearms skills. So picking skills is really easy in this game. It's a very easy thing to do at character creation. Now, there is some character progression in this game that's supported by the core rule books. So you can, if your character survives their given scenario, they can improve their stats and saves. They can also undergo training for skills, which is great. Now, in some cases, the training isn't risk-free. If you had a character that previously did not have military training, but you decided to sign them up for military training, there's actually a chance that in the, I think, year or two that they are busy training off screen, that they die in active combat. Or it would be funny also if they died during training exercises. Another thing that makes creating a character really quick and easy are the loadout, trinket, and patch tables. So when you create a character, part of the process is also rolling for your character's loadout or kind of gear that they start with. That's always fun. Two things that can add some or inspire some role-playing opportunities or further give backstory to your character are the trinkets and patches. So these are two different tables that you can roll on, and your character could start with a trinket that may or may not have significance to them. So sometimes you can have a trinket or keepsake like a bonsai tree or fossil. And patches also add a little bit of personality to your player characters. I imagine these are patches that they keep on their various clothing items or suits. If you want to flavor it as something as an emblem that they put on their equipment as well, or even a tattoo could work. There are some that range from Snake Eyes emblem to one I'm looking at right now that is Bohika, which is an acronym for Bend Over, Here It Comes Again. One of my favorite parts about character creation is actually finding out what trinkets and patches my character was assigned, and figuring out how that might fit into my player character's personality and personal history. Like I said before, skills are really cool. They can make it easier for you to accomplish certain tasks or resist things. So these range from linguistics to zero gravity to computers at the kind of base levels, which are trained skills, and further tiers of skills can be chosen as well. If your character has the prerequisite skill. So here's an example. Someone with military training at the trained skill level can choose to take firearms at the expert level, and then the command skill at the master skill level. Another path here is taking the computers trained skill, then moving on to the hacking expert skill, and finally the artificial intelligence master skill. If you want to get a little chaotic, your character can take jury rigging at the trained skill and then move on to explosives at the expert skill level. There's a Mothership Companion application that makes it even easier to make a character. You can probably do it in about half the time. The name and other details for that companion app will be in the show notes. So let's move away from characters and get more into the mechanics of the game. As I said before, if there are stakes or your player character is under pressure, you can attempt to do something or resist something by rolling under your stat or a save. And if you succeed, great. If you fail by rolling over that value, then you fail. And when you fail, you take a stress. And stress is a really fun mechanic in this game because as you take stress in this game from failing stat or save checks, it sets your character up for having a really bad time when they panic. Panicking happens in a few ways. When you witness an allied character die, or you witness something really messed up. Another way is by critically failing a stat or save check. And by the way, a critical success happens when you roll under your stat and the digits are repeated. So an 11, a 33, a 44, and a critical failure happens when you roll over your stat and save with a repeating number. And panicking in this game represents your player character's inability to keep it together under pressure. So you can have some really fun moments where your player characters are trying to overcome some obstacle, or they're being hunted by some sort of horrific entity. And one among you does a critical failure and starts panicking. Maybe the panic result is that they become catatonic. So the rest of the group is trying their best to fight this thing off, and your character kind of just sits down in a corner and freezes. So generally you want to keep your character's stress as low as possible, because the more stress your character has, the more likely your character is going to panic, and the range of possible consequences for panicking might be more dire. So at a lower stress threshold, the worst thing that can happen to your character when they panic is that they go catatonic. But if you are at the higher ends of the stress thresholds, then there is a chance that your character actually dies immediately from a panic-induced heart attack. And now I'm joined in studio again by my baby, who's now almost 7 weeks old. Another way things get crazy in this game is when your character takes a wound. Wounds in this game can really shift the power balance. Everyone's a gangster until they take their first wound. Your character might be feeling pretty good in their spacesuit or their armored suit, but as soon as damage penetrates that and deals enough damage to have them take their first wound, things can actually go to shit really fast. When your character takes a wound, generally, they become less able to deal with the obstacles. A wound could be losing a finger. It could be breaking a spine. Could be bleeding out from somewhere. So your character's survivability could start to diminish rapidly, depending on the wound your character takes. And in this game, player characters normally have 2 or 3 wounds that they can take until they die, or have to make a death save to determine whether or not they die at that time. And sometimes the wounds are instant death. For example, a really severe gunshot wound can actually be a headshot. So your character could be doing really well and they get hit by a revolver bullet. If the wound is severe enough and it's a headshot wound, your character is dead instantly, even if it's their first wound. But no worries, just be a good sport about it and roll up a new character. I think another important thing to mention here in regards to mechanics is the 2 different ways you can have actions resolve in the game. You can play this game with, I think, one of the more popular ways of resolving actions, where it's completely turn-based and characters say what they want to do, and that action was resolved at once, and then you move forward narratively to the next character who can make an action, and so on. The other way, which I really like for this game, and this is, I'd say, the way that is encouraged or proposed by the game, but is by no means the only way of playing the game, is to resolve actions simultaneously in the narrative. So when you have a group of player characters and non-player characters making actions in the game in a given situation, you can have them do their various stat or saves checks. And to make this simpler, you could have all the player characters that are allied with each other say what they want to do, and then you can move on to the non-player characters and have them do what they're going to do. After this, you have everyone do their different roles, and you, as a GM, take a little bit of time to interpret what happens in the narrative based on the successes and failures among the group. So this takes a little getting used to be fair, especially if you have a large group or a large number of characters in the same scene. But if you are playing with 2 or 3 player characters and maybe one monster, or maybe just 2 or 3 non-player or threats in that same scene, this actually is a lot of fun for sure. And don't overthink this. It will take some time to get used to, but it actually lends to a cinematic and also often fast and loose way of resolving actions in a action round. I find this way turns actually go quicker than in some other games. A player really can just say what they want to do, and the GM may or may not call for a stat or save roll that's appropriate for that. Your players aren't going to be measuring how many squares away they are from something or calculating ranges. They're not going to be looking at spell descriptions or detailed information about their attacks and effects. You can have a lot of creativity with how things play out here. You can have a character who wants to shoot a monster, a character who looks at their combat stat and decides that it's too low, so they will go and maybe make a strength check to knock over something to block the monster's escape. Another character can decide they might want to run away from the monster if they are like right next to it. So they maybe use a speed check to kind of slink away without getting hurt. And the monster, if you want to assign it a stat check also, you as a GM could have it make a sort of attack on players. And how this could resolve is, the character that succeeds the gunshot connects the player that failed the speed check to get out of the way of the creature safely, gets hit by the creature while they're disengaging or trying to escape. The person who tried to push over something really heavy to block the creature's escape, if they critically fail, perhaps that same object falls on top of them, dealing damage to them or pinning them down and making them vulnerable. And instead of going sequentially and saying that these characters are all reacting to what came before them, you can have this sort of play out in almost a split second, kind of all of this is happening simultaneously or very closely together, which sometimes simulates these really chaotic split second decisions that player characters and non-player characters might be making. So that's a lot of fun. Okay, here's another example of a potential action round in this game. Let's say you have two player characters, part of a crew. There's Ash and Bruno. They are in a small room aboard a space station. There is this creepy alien creature that is skittering in the vents. So in this scene, Bruno, knowing they don't have a strong combat stat, decides to spend their turn running over to the vent opening where this creature is about to pop out of and stuff an explosive device into the vent's opening. And at the same time, Ash is going to run over and close the vent and weld it shut so that the creature can't escape from the blast. The creature that has a sort of projectile attack will try to strike one of the two targets at the same time. Let's say all three characters in this scene succeed on their stat check rolls. In that case, Bruno is able to stuff the explosive device in the vent where the creature is. The creature is able to strike Bruno as he's doing that, and Ash finally is able to slam and weld the lid shut. The explosive device goes off and the creature is seemingly incinerated along with anything else within the vents nearby. And for example, if Bruno critically failed stuffing that explosive device into the event. Perhaps Bruno accidentally dropped the explosive device at his feet, making it a very dangerous place to stick around as he panics and becomes catatonic. Or perhaps Ash wasn't able to weld the lid shut on the vent, and the creature would be able to skitter out and escape the blast from the explosive device, and perhaps even get in a better vantage point to strike at Ash and Bruno. Not sure if I explained that in the best way, but hopefully when you listen to some actual plays or other people talking about this, you'll get a sense of how this works. But if you're a GM, give yourself a chance to get used to this kind of way of running a scene or a round of action. Be kind to yourself with that, because it can be quite different from some other tabletop role-playing games, but I find it really satisfying. So what do I think about this game? I love Mothership. I've loved it from the first session that I've run. I will talk about that actually in another episode. We are just past, at the time of recording, we are just past the 1-year anniversary of me running my first game of Mothership. And I actually ran my first 2 games in the same weekend around this time last year for 2 different groups. And so I have really fond memories of starting with that, and also over the last year. I think at this point I've run maybe 15 or so sessions of Mothership, and I've had returning players, new players. This game really lends itself well to one-shots, or scenarios that can be wrapped up in 1 to 2 sessions, or maybe a total playtime of 4 to 6 hours. I also completed a 10-month campaign for Mothership with a group of 5 or 6 players, and that was a blast. And there are plenty of campaign supplements for this game, as well as one-shot supplements. So if you introduce this game to a group of players and maybe started with a one-shot just to see how everyone's liking it and to ease into it, if those players are also into it with you and you're getting the hang of the game, you can continue doing one-shots with new characters or even surviving characters, or you can even start a multi-session campaign, something that's 5 to 10 sessions long, or more. But we all know how hard it is to keep a campaign going till the end, especially as they might drag on over time. A cool thing about this game is that you don't need a whole lot actually to play and run it. I'd say the main thing to have is the player's survival guide, which is the sort of rulebook. It's only about 40 or so pages long, and I think it's supposed to fit in a A5 paper size. So that's smaller than the usual 8.5 by 11 sheet. So the core rules is one thing. Another thing to have would be character sheets. That's great. Your D100 dice, and depending on what you want to run, you could run something that you create yourself, or a pamphlet scenario adventure, which are typically one shot or 1 to 2 session kinds of games. These are really cheap. There are some that are first party that are published by Tuesday Night Games, but there are plenty of third party ones also out there. And the Mothership community is a really prolific third party community. Another thing you could do if you wanted to go into campaigns, you could run a campaign module or run content from a campaign module. And again, those are actually relatively cheap compared to other tabletop role-playing games. you will not be paying the same price as you would for a Dungeons and Dragons hardcover adventure book. You can find good pamphlets for, let's say, $1.99 to $3.99 US. Some campaign modules for $7 US to maybe 15 on the higher end US. And about which of these modules or supplements I would recommend starting with, it sort of depends on what kind of flavor or game you and your table are looking forward to running and playing. There are some great investigation horror scenarios. One of those is definitely the Haunting of Ipsilon 14. That's a common one that's recommended, and I think it's one of the very first pamphlet adventures that was released for Mothership. I've run one session of that, and I really liked it. So I could recommend that for someone who's looking for something that's more of an investigation with something going on a mining station. Another investigation horror one would be Piece by Piece, which I've run a session of as well and completed in one session. That was a lot of fun. There is or can be some action in that one. If you and your players are looking for something with more action, then the prologue to the Dead Planet campaign module called The Screaming on the Alexis is a really great pick from me. That's the very first supplement I actually ran for Mothership. So I have really fond memories of that, and I loved how it went. Another good one is Moonbase Blues, which has a lot of potential for action and is just overall really fun with some of the characterization or roleplay opportunities. If you're looking for something that's, and I haven't run it yet or even played in it, but Tuesday Night Games, they released a sort of starter adventure for Mothership called Another Bug Hunt. And my impression of it is that it's sort of evoking that Colonial Marines or Alien 2 kind of vibe. I mentioned the core rulebook, the Player's Survival Guide. There are also a few other first-party supplements for this game. There is the Warden's Operations Manual, which is sort of the equivalent to the Dungeons and Dragons Dungeons Master's Guide. It's really great. It has handy tips, but you actually don't need it necessarily to run a session. Another book is the Shipbreaker's Toolkit, which is a supplement that's focused on spacecraft and managing spacecraft and running rules for using spacecraft. So that's really great. I really love that one. I'm looking forward to using those rules. Another book is sort of the equivalent of the Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual. This is the Unconfirmed Contact Reports. And so this is a collection of horrific entities or creatures that you can throw against your player characters. But for something like 90 to 95% of running and playing Mothership, you only need the Player's Survival Guide, the core rulebook. And even then, you only need some of those rules in there. Other things like oxygen or rules on radiation, addiction, shore leave, character progression may come up in your game, but I don't think as often as other things like combat, wounds, panic, and of course, death checks. And now that I'm talking about these different supplements and the rulebook, I also need to talk a bit about the different versions of the Mothership game that are out there. This game first released as the Zero Edition. You can think of it as a sort of beta edition. I think it released maybe 3 years ago like that. And it still became quite popular. A lot of people really enjoyed that version from what it sounds like. That version ended up getting revised further or refined further. And so the game is now in its first edition, also known as 1E. The thing that is significant about this is a lot of the earlier supplements that came out for this game are compatible for the Zero Edition. And while some of them have been converted or re-released for first edition, there are still some that you might come across that are community favorites that just haven't been converted to first edition. It's not a big deal. There are maybe just a few tweaks to make, but overall, you're making these tweaks to make sure that the threats or obstacles kind of fit with the first edition stats. And so you won't have a threat that was balanced in Zero Edition is now not so balanced up against a first edition player character, or is way too lethal for a first edition player character. So those are the main concerns, but otherwise you don't need to worry too much about converting things from one edition to the other. I think the biggest thing to worry about is accidentally buying the rule books for Zero Edition instead of the first edition. This happened to one of my friends, and unfortunately I had warned him about this very thing, and he still bought the wrong edition. So on the Mothership website and other places, on DriveThruRPG or wherever else you might buy a tabletop role-playing game, you need to make sure that you don't buy the Zero Edition by accident. As far as I know, it's still up for sale. Even if there's a first edition or 1E that's out. I mean, I pre-ordered the first edition Kickstarter, so I'm not a backer on the Kickstarter, but I'm someone who pre-ordered through, I guess, a backer kit for the first edition of Mothership, meaning that when the Kickstarter completes, I will get a copy of the game and other things when the backers do, or shortly after the backers do. So just make sure when you are looking around to get into Mothership that you pick the right version. I think there were great reasons why the game was refined into the first edition. So I do strongly recommend getting the first edition. I also am making this caution so you don't end up buying something twice, like buying the Zero Edition by accident and then buying the first edition. And I find the rule differences are large enough to warrant that sort of warning. Overall, Mothership and Cloud Empress have become my two favorite tabletop role-playing games at this time. It's been really refreshing for me as someone who's come from games like Dungeons & Dragons 5e and a little bit of the Cyberpunk Red tabletop role-playing game. Those games are more crunchy. There are more rules involved. It's more involved to create a character and to manage a character, from character creation through leveling up or other sorts of character progression. Mothership is very easy to get into. Characters are very easy to generate. The game rolls really well. You don't spend too long making choices. The action is resolved kind of narratively. And then for the next round of action, you do it all over again until the scene ends. For me, compared to games like Dungeons & Dragons, Mothership really leans towards the cinematic. I really feel like I'm in a science fiction horror or science fiction action horror movie or video game when I'm playing this. There are plenty of oh shit moments when your player character gets ready to do something really cool, but either fails or even worse, critically fails their roll for it and things go horribly wrong. There are times where something goes wrong with one character, and that sort of cascades into plans falling apart for the rest of the crew. There are times where other characters who have been accumulating a lot of stress throughout the session start looking like liabilities next to their allies. We've had cases where a Marine with really strong weaponry and armor just kept accumulating stress after stress. And at some point, we were all just waiting for the straw to break the camel's back, and for that character potentially at the worst time to finally snap and accidentally harm or get in the way of their allies. There are times where someone is feeling really comfortable in their spacesuit, but a sharp screwdriver ended up puncturing the suit, and they had to rush and get duct tape before they could make their spacewalk to safety. We had a moment where an android that specialized in linguistics critically succeeded in throwing a grenade, not once, but twice in a campaign, leading to absolute devastation. In another scene, one character broke through the armor of an enemy, and then an ally put their flamethrower nozzle inside that hole and roasted that enemy from within their armored suit. One character got their hand shot off, and another one nearly bled to death in another session. It's happened a few times, but there are moments where one character will fail a check, and it will cause other characters to panic or take a stress. So player characters have this thing called a trauma response. For example, whenever a Marine panics, it freaks out nearby friendly player characters. So those nearby friendly player characters must make a fear save. Similarly, if your player characters are hanging around an android, because androids are inherently unnerving or make many people uneasy just being around, fear saves that are made by nearby friendly players are made at disadvantage, meaning that you roll twice the D100 and you take the least favorable outcome. Another fun moment is when a scientist fails a sanity save, and that causes nearby friendly players to gain a stress. You can imagine a scientist type in a horror movie who is struggling to grapple with something unknowable or otherworldly or anomalous. Those are always fun moments when those guys are getting stressed, and just by watching the scientists lose their grip on reality while they're studying a phenomenon also makes the other characters around them stressed. Anyway, I've probably said it several times in this episode, but I love Mothership. I hope that you love it too when you give it a try. I hope that this episode has been helpful with giving a bit of a rundown and some recommendations on where to start with the game. I really hope that you give this a shot and really enjoy this. A cool thing about the Mothership community is that it's very active and vibrant. You can find the Reddit Mothership community. There's a Mothership Discord community as well. There are a few content creators who deal with Mothership, and some might even focus on Mothership as well. If you're still on the fence about it, check out reviews or previews about the adventure scenarios if you're a GM. Maybe check out an actual play episode. If you're a GM, totally go for it. If you're a player, maybe tune in for a few minutes so you don't spoil the rest of the scenario potentially for yourself. I've been focusing quite a bit on Cloud Empress so far for this podcast, but I do have a lot of Mothership episodes planned, whether those are reviews, discussions, previews, or even actual plays. They are definitely in the pipeline, although my release schedule has been really messed up, as I mentioned in my Instagram post. And connect with me online. Let me know what you think of Mothership, if you're getting into it. If you have any questions or are looking for any other recommendations. I was just kind of spitballing in this episode, but Mothership is definitely something that I've had on my mind for the last year. So even if something didn't quite come to mind for this episode recording, I will definitely have other thoughts to share. But for now, I think this is a great place to leave off and open up the conversation with you. At the time of episode release, the Mothership Sci-Fi Horror RPG First Edition has officially released. The Kickstarter backers and pre-order purchasers should have received digital versions of the game. I know we have, and should be receiving physical goods soon. Visit mothershiprpg.com or drivethroughrpg.com for more info on Mothership and Mothership supplements. Our music is from Epidemic Sound. Check the show notes for credits. Please connect with us online. You can reach us on Instagram or by email. We'd love to hear from you. One way you could support this show is by telling your friends and your gaming community about us. And another way is locking on to our signal by subscribing to our feed. And while you're at it, set up a notification alert so you don't miss an episode. As always, thanks to our listeners. Over and out.